What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and I'm finally back from vacation and ready to get down to business with some more episodes of Poker Hands. And we're going to kick this off with a great hand that I found from Live at the Bike between Garrett and Art. This is honestly an amazing hand that you guys are going to want to check out. But before we do that, I want to let you know I'm going to be streaming at some point here. I figure I'll throw a bankroll challenge session in the mix. Now, it's a little difficult to know exactly what to do because I just don't think I can do WSOP anymore. There seems to be almost zero action on the site. You can't win with zero action, so we're probably going to mix it up. The only site that I can actually play from in Las Vegas is ACR. It kills me on the inside. I will continue to mull over my options, but it's likely going that direction. Anyway, let's move on and jump into this episode of Poker Hands.
Well, as it was happening.
I'm always in except for the river.
And look at this. We have a hand here. Pocket kings and ace king. Wow. Garrett raising it up, and holy crap, this could be a huge pot. 3,000 from Art, and you better believe Garrett's putting in a 4-bet.
Yeah.
Re-raise to 9,000.
Wow.
The other streets.
This is going to be a fun hand. Buckle up.
Yeah, I expect Art to flat here pretty much always. I don't think Art is going to want to play a big pot here, honestly.
For what it's worth.
He's out of position. He has an unsuited hand. Obviously, ace king is super nutted against Garrett. But again, he doesn't 4-bet that often, right? Like, he has some 4-bet bluffs, but once he gets to the 4-bet, 5-bet zone, like, Garrett's very value heavy. And Art is just going to call. So we're going to go to the flop, 18K in the pot.
Our hand today kicks off at 100-200 with some seriously deep stacks, so I hope you guys like deep stack poker. Garrett decides to make it 600 with his pocket kings, and the action folds to Art in the small blind, who looks down at ace king. He now decides to bump it up to 3,000, a bit on the larger size, but I like the 3-bet, especially when you consider stack size, you're out of position. I don't mind going with a bit of a bigger size here, even though this is a 5x 3-bet. Action folds now back to Garrett with his pocket kings. Now, as you get deeper, you want to get a little trickier with your big pairs. However, when you're facing a 3-bet, you're primarily going to want to 4-bet with your value holdings like aces, kings, queens, and ace king. So Garrett does decide to re-raise, makes it 9,000 to go. Definitely a large-sized 4-bet here. I think maybe Garrett's thinking that because stacks are so deep, he doesn't want to give him as good of odds out of position to flat. Now, personally, I'd probably go with something a little more like 8,200. I think the fact that you go so large lets Art fold some hands, not have to worry about it. If you pick a size more like 8K, he's going to have to make some awkward decisions with hands like King-Jack suited or Ace-Queen or 10-9 suited, and you might have to let some of them go, and he has to make some decisions. In general, in poker, you want to pick bet sizes that force your opponents to make mistakes that really capitalize on the advantage your range has against them. I think a bit of a smaller size wouldn't be too bad of a decision. Anyway, 9K, totally fine, and back over to Art with ace king. Now, with ace king here, you should almost always be flatting. In fact, in a recent video, we talked about how as stacks get super deep, it's actually fine to play your entire range as a call so that post-flop, you've got a lot of different holdings in your range, including aces and kings, to protect yourself against aggression. I will say, if you wanted to once in a while make a decent sized 5-bet here, you could do aces, maybe occasionally mix in a bluff like ace king, or once in a while a hand like kings if you think your opponent's getting particularly out of line. But all in all, you should generally be flatting here, which Art does, and let's take a flop.
Doing is just trying to like slow myself
And
down. And, like,
Queen, queen 10. Dangerous board.
like I'm used to playing limit hold when I play hold.
You play more limit?
I think that Art could definitely have pocket 10s here. I think either player could definitely have ace queen here. A lot of things are going through these players' minds. And Garrett is going to check back for pot control here.
The flop comes queen, queen 10, which is a very dangerous board for the player who 4-bet. The reason is that the guy who 3-bets and calls is much more likely to have hands like ace queen suited, king queen suited, queen jack suited, queen 10 suited, pocket 10s, all certainly holdings he could have, as well as even just queens. However, Garrett isn't going to have nearly as many queens in his range. When you 4-bet in this situation, you're going to have more hands like suited aces as bluffs. You might occasionally have a hand like king queen or queen jack suited as a bluff. Those could be some reasonable ones too. But you're more weighted towards hands like aces, kings, jacks, or a hand like ace x suited or ace king, much less likely to have a queen in your range. That call preflop of the 4-bet defines Art's range a decent amount more than Garrett's, and so we know that he's a little more likely to have a queen. Art checks over to Garrett, and in this spot, I think I'd like to advocate for a bet your entire range type situation. The reason is simple. If Garrett does have a hand like aces or kings, occasionally queens, maybe even a hand like jacks, he's going to want to bet to get a little value from ace, king, ace, jack, 10x, and also put some hands like 8s or 9s in a tough spot. Then with his bluffs like ace, king, ace, jack, ace, x suited, in those situations with those holdings, you get a very profitable bluff opportunity as you're building together your range. It's also important to remember, as your range preflop becomes more specific and more value heavy, you should be betting the flop at a higher frequency. This is because your range is stronger than their range and you're going to have tons of overpairs in it. So I think I'd like to see just a small 1/4 to 1/3 pot bet size here from Garrett with all of the hands in his entire range. Anyway, Garrett does decide to check it back, and let's take a turn.
He knows that he doesn't have a 3-street hand that often. Turn is an 8.
But yeah, I haven't played No Limit in years.
Check.
What do you
And
like?
Art checks.
Draw games.
You like
I
draw?
think Garrett's about to half pot it, maybe like 9,500, something around there.
No shit.
Yeah, I mean, once you check
Maybe
back
11K.
flop with your hand, I think that,
Sometime you would like
What the fuck is
I mean, you could definitely trap and check back sometimes, but I think most of the time you're going to want to go for value on the turn and get value on the river. Again, from some ace highs, from jacks, from a 10. There's so many hands that Art can have in this spot.
Oh, you
Zero
oh,
to
five.
Garrett's going to bet 6K into 18, so he bets about a 1/3 pot, small bet,
And then there's another round of betting.
and
5 card draw. Oh.
Art's going to
Yes,
check
roll
call.
like a low hand, not a high hand.
Oh, it's a low hand.
Yeah.
5 card
30K in the pot.
The turn comes the 8 of hearts, which is giving this board a little more life. Now we see a gut shot straight draw for anyone with a jack or a 9, as well as a backdoor flush draw, so it's a little less static of a board than we saw on the flop. Now, the question for Art is, should he take a stab here with ace-king? And I don't really mind his decision either way. He does have some more natural bluff candidates like king-jack suited or ace-jack suited, but is that really enough? Does that really give him enough bluffs in his range to be able to bet just those hands? I think maybe not. I don't think he should be flatting a hand like ace-jack offsuit to this 4-bet. It's way too big. He should be letting that one go. So realistically, those are the only two hands other than maybe a hand like ace-9 suited, again, on the loose side preflop, that he can have to bluff here. Because of that, I do think ace-king should be working into his range as a bet from time to time. And another good aspect of ace-king, which we're going to discuss more on the river, is that you do block aces and kings, but not as many of the bluffs. I think bluffs are more likely to be a hand like ace-5 suited, or maybe a hand like 9-7 suited, which might be a hand that he wasn't quite sure what to do preflop. Those are more likely to be bluffs than hands containing an ace or a king. Anyway, Art does decide to go ahead and check, which totally reasonable, should certainly be checking here sometimes as well. And now the action's once again on Garrett. After having checked back the flop, kings is now a clear bet. If you check here, you risk a jack on the river, a 9 on the river, a heart on the river, an ace on the river. These are all bad rivers for you that you don't want to see, so you have to bet and begin to get some value. Now, Garrett does decide to go with a bet on the smaller side here. I think if it goes check on the flop and your opponent checks the turn, you want to size up a little bit larger. The reason is that if your opponent has a queen out of position, he should primarily be betting himself here on the turn. That way he can bluff with some hands like ace king, ace jack, king jack, and also you build that pot when you have a queen to try and get the most value from your opponent. It's worth saying Art should trap some hands here out of position. I lean towards trapping hands like queen 10 or 10-10, where the river isn't going to matter too much to you and you have a lot of the board really locked up, and betting hands more like ace queen, king queen suited, queen jack suited. Although certainly with all of those strong hands this deep, you should mainly be betting to try and build that pot. Anyway, now facing a small bet here with ace-king, kind of a weird, tough spot for Art. One of the good things, again, I think your removal is pretty nice with ace-king, and you do have a gut shot to improve against a hand like aces or kings. If he has kings, your ace might be live as well, and there is some chance that Garrett has ace-king himself, probably not too likely, and is bluffing, and you could maybe chop the pot. So all in all, I think the price you're getting is a little bit too good to be folding. It's worth noting that your value range should sometimes check raise here. Again, when you have a queen or a boat in the turn, mainly bet, but sometimes check. And when you face a bet, you should probably mainly check raise, but sometimes call. This is how you build out those value ranges to protect yourself in all of the lines. So I would not mind at all seeing ace king as one of your check raise hands here. Yeah, sure, maybe it's better to use a hand like ace jack where you have the double gutter, but the removal effects with ace king are a little bit stronger. So I wouldn't mind ace king or ace jack making their way into both of those lines, but if I had a hand like king jack, I'd probably lean towards betting. Anyway, Art does decide to go with the check call, and let's take a river.
So the goal is to make the worst.
And the river is an 8.
best possible
So
hand is
wheels
to
are
make
Here's the
3, 4,
board.
5, 7. The
Art
worst
with
way
ace
to-
high, Garrett with kings and
Oh,
queens.
'cause the wheels are
And
short,
Art's
so
going to
snug
check.
in.
Correct.
And now Garrett is going to think about going for value here.
Oh, he's definitely going for value. The sizing is going to be
7,
interesting.
5, 4, 3, 2.
I like going about 2/3 pot.
And this is what separates, you know,
Yeah, it's a really
a lot of players at lower levels will just bet one street here and check back this river because they're happy with the pot.
There's
They're
betting
scared about their
you're
opponent
currently betting
having,
after the draw.
correct. Yeah.
you know, a full house.
There's no limit.
And so a lot of players will check back
That
here
sounds
at the
fun. I
lower
don't know
level,
why
but at
it
this
sounds
level,
sick, but
and when you're a beast like Garrett and you're playing against a great player like Art, you're going to find thin value and you're going to go
yes,
for these spots. And Garrett is going to pick a price here.
It's pretty clear value bet here. I mean,
I mean, this is a board that is what you would call a polarized board, and Garrett has a hand that's pocket kings that he's going for value, but it's not a polarized hand, but it's a polarized board. And so Garrett can bet a large amount on this board and get called possibly by ace high or by
Who's
jacks.
in the tank here, Adelstein? No, don't rush. I'm just asking who it was.
yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see Garrett bet somewhere in the 20 to 30K range.
Bet. 21,000.
Yeah,
21,000.
2/3 exactly what I expected.
Yeah, just a little over 2/3 pot from Garrett. And now Art has a decision to make. He has ace king. It's ace high. What can he beat here?
Here's where Art's leak used to be, is that he would get himself in these spots where the line is not really too bluff heavy, and he would still find a hero call. And this is where I want to see improvement from Art, because I know he has it in him to be able to get away from these hands, because that was definitely an exploitable leak in his game before.
And look at this. Art is cutting out a bluff raise.
I wanted to check so bad.
51,000.
I wanted to check so fucking
51,000 from Art. He just made an insane check raise bluff on Garrett Adelstein.
bad. Why didn't I just check? I don't know. Like, it's just such fucking garbage. Just watching me fucking check. I'm just bluffing with so many things so often there. It's just so fucking garbage to check. But that's what I do. Just ridiculous, stupid shit, you know? But no, just still fucking felt the need to bet. I mean, I just feel like he has like 19 queens. Like it's just like never, you know what
Garrett
I mean?
is back on tilt.
Like it's just never even like a 10 in his hand. It's just like 19 fucking queens.
Why?
You know?
The river comes an offsuit 8, which is essentially just a brick. Garrett's not going to be betting at 8 on the turns. That card never hits him. And Art shouldn't have too many hands pre-flop that can 3-bet and call a 4-bet that hit this 8. Yeah, maybe 9-8 suited or maybe ace-8 suited. But again, those aren't too likely given the size of the 4-bet. Now, Art checks once again, and now over to Garrett. He has to make a decision, and I think he's got a pretty clear bet. It's very unlikely Art has an 8 here given everything that's happened. And if you had a queen, you should primarily be betting or check raising. So it's a good spot now for Garrett to go for some value, which he does decide to do by betting 21,000. Back over to Art, he can't be happy with how things have gone. Now, if Garrett was bluffing with a hand like ace-5 suited, well, he's chopping against ace-king. He only wins if Garrett does have a hand like maybe king-jack or 9-7 suited. Really, there aren't too many hands that he can hope for Garrett to have that he can beat. So, with ace-king, the question now becomes, are you getting good enough odds to call? And I'm leaning towards no. I think in this situation, if you were going to call, it's much better to call with a 10. Even though the card removal of ace-king is stronger, Because you might possibly chop with some bluffs, you need the showdown value in this instance. It's important on the river when you're debating bluff catching to remember, if there's any chance that your opponent's bluffs might win or chop, those hands that you're considering calling with are a lot worse than the ones that are much stronger. For example, a hand like Ace 10 or King 10 might be a much better call here than a hand like Ace King. Anyway, Art has other things in mind and breaks out some chips and raises it up to 51,000. Now, I actually think this is a pretty good play. I might have preferred a turn bet or a turn check raise on average, but this is still a good play. When you have Ace King, you now cut down drastically on your opponent's combinations of both aces and kings. In fact, Garrett is half as likely to have aces or kings here than if he had a hand like, let's just say, pocket nines. You block 3 combos of aces and 3 combos of kings. So Ace King might be one of your best absolute possible hands to use here to bluff. Now, Garrett might occasionally from time to time have a boat himself or a queen himself, in which case, this is obviously not going to be getting through, but it's more important to block the larger part of your opponent's value range. It's way more likely Garrett has aces or kings here than a hand like 10-10 or queen 10. And yes, it sucks when they have those hands, but again, we want to block the most combos we possibly can for value. I also really like the size that Art chose to raise, not because I think it looks like a value bet or whatever bullshit live pros say, but because this board is so static. On paired boards, particularly double paired boards, you're going to want to make sure that you use smaller sizes because when you don't have trips, they are much more likely to have it and vice versa. So using small sizes accomplishes your goals in a great way. One extremely important thing to note here is that you have so many combinations of Ace King preflop that you want to be very, very specific with how often you do this post flop. I mean, you have 12 combinations of Ace King offsuit and 4 combinations of Ace King suited. So if you use Ace King here much at all, well, you're going to be bluffing way too much unless you have a lot of queens in this line. And yes, he could have Queen 10 or 10-10 or 8-8 some of the time as well, but those are not going to be very frequent compared to how often you have a hand like pocket jacks or a 10 or ace king or ace jack. Those are all way, way, way more likely. So when you do make this move, you should only be doing it 3, 5, 7% of the time, or else you're going to start to bluff way too much, especially in a passive line where you're representing a trap. He's really saying on the turn that he had a good hand and he was trapping, unless he has one of the maybe few possible combinations of an 8. So back over to Garrett with pocket kings, and you are in a terrible spot now. He's going to have to call 30 to win a pot that would be 130,000, so he's getting really attractive odds in a call. So the next question here from Garrett is, what overpairs does he want to call? Sure, he's going to have a hand like queen 10 or 10-10 or queens from time to time, but those are going to be rare compared to the overpairs. He's going to have to call a lot of overpairs here because he's already folding his bluffs, and then he's also going to fold a couple overpairs. If you fold many overpairs, you're giving Art an amazing price on his bluff. He's risking 51,000 when he does raise here on the river to win just about 51,000. That's an amazing price. Only has to work half the time in order to be profitable. So Garrett's going to have to make some calls with some hands that really don't want to call. Back to figuring out which hands you'd want to call, and it's kind of tough to really differentiate between them. I think it's safe to say that if you had a queen here somehow, that would be awesome, but no shit, you're going to call your trips. So not really too relevant to the discussion on what we do with our overpairs. What I would say is that you'd want to have kings or aces that block the suited queen combos. Let me give you an example. If Garrett had king of spades, king of diamonds here, then king queen suited could be possible because the king of clubs, the queen of clubs and queen of hearts are on the board, and he would have the remaining kings, making that hand simply impossible. So I would lean towards folding the overpairs like aces and kings with a heart and a club, because in those instances you are not blocking any of the value range, but you are blocking some of the bluffs. I think the overpairs with a diamond and a spade are mandatory calls. The ones with a heart and a club are mandatory folds, and then the ones in the middle you get a little bit of leeway with. Unfortunately for Garrett, he's got one of those decisions. Now, the question becomes, what does he do with those hands? And frankly, here it's very close. In spots like this, I generally try to lean towards this line of thinking. If I don't know what my opponent's doing and they're getting a really fairly attractive price on their bluff, I try to mainly call until I learn otherwise. Yeah, I'm going to fold my bluffs, and I'll fold my particularly bad calls like a hand with the king of diamonds, king of spades in it. But I'm going to mainly call with these holdings because I don't want to allow my opponent a profitable opportunity to bluff. There is also all kinds of exploitative logic you could use here. Do you think he would trap? Do you think he's balanced with this approach? All of those kinds of things. But I just think you end up going down the rabbit hole, and you should really just try to stick to playing good poker. It's also worth saying that on boards that favor one player, it's okay to fold exploitably. So maybe in this spot specifically, because Art does have a lot more queens than Garrett does, maybe Garrett could fold 1 or 2 more combos than he might normally. But at the end of the day, when you're playing poker, never underestimate your opponents, and Garrett isn't one to do that.
Pressure bust pipes. Let's see what happens. I'm really curious.
Yeah, that's stupid. Alright, you got it, buddy.
And Garrett's going to fold. And Art is going to take down this pot. Did he fold his cards yet?
Art,
And
show
he
the
does
bluff,
fold.
please.
It's
Please,
gonna
if
be
you
on
got the
stream anyway,
bluff,
just
if
show
you
it,
have the
just
bluff.
show it.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. Nice one.
Yeah, that's right, he folds. I was just messing with you with the thumbnail because you guys always say I spoil the video. What now? Are you surprised? Gonna have to think twice next time you see my thumbnails, right? See you guys again soon. Oh yeah, and before I go, if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button.